Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to provision our very first EC2 instance. So this is part one. We're going to keep it just under 20 minutes if we can. And we're going to provision a little EC2 instance and turn it into a web server. So this is a lab and you will need to log into the AWS console. Okay, so here I am in the AWS console. Now up here, we can control our region. I'm going to do this rest of this course in Northern Virginia. And we're going to go over to services and we will find EC2 as the very first service that's under compute. So go ahead and click on that. So this is the EC2 dashboard. This is actually a new dashboard. You can toggle between the old dashboard and the new dashboard just by turning this off, on and off. I'm going to use the new dashboard and you can see here that I've got everything as zeros. So I haven't gone in and launched an EC2 instance before. So we can launch an EC2 instance just by clicking in here and going to launch instance and go ahead and launch your first instance. Now, step one is always to choose an Amazon machine image. And an Amazon machine image is just choosing your virtual machine. So do you want to be running Amazon Linux, or do you want to be running SUSE Linux or Red Hat, or would you like to be running Windows, for example? So I'm going to go with Amazon Linux 2 AMI. We are going to use this for the rest of the course. So go ahead and click on Amazon Linux 2 AMI. In here, we've got all our different instance types. So we can actually control it up here as well. So we could have micro instances, compute optimized, general purpose, GPU, memory optimized, storage optimized, etc. And just see if you can remember that mnemonic. It was Fight Dr. McPixie AU. So that's these instances in here. Now, where you'll see free tier eligible, that means that this instance stays within free tier. So for the rest of this course, we are going to be using T2 micros. T3, you can get T3 micros now, but again, it's not going to be free tier eligible, so I'm going to run a T2 micro. Let's go ahead and configure our instance details, and this is where we really start to set everything up. So the number of instances, I'm going to launch one. I'm not going to click launch into an auto-scaling group. We're going to cover off auto-scaling group in the high availability section of the course. Down here, we can do request spot instances. So we could set our spot price. I'm not going to do that. We're just going to go on demand. We're going to launch it into our default VPC. VPC just stands for Virtual Private Cloud. We're going to have a whole VPC section coming up. Right now, we're just using our own default VPCs that Amazon create for us. And when we go into the VPC section, of course, we'll be creating our own. Subnets in here, this is a way of choosing which availability zone you want to go into. So if you want US East 1A, 1B, 1C, etc., you can select in here. Interesting thing to note is that this is randomized. So if I was to sign up to another AWS account and I select US East 1A, basically the two accounts might be in completely different availability zones. So 1A for one account might not be 1A for another account. So it's something to note. Down here, we've got auto-assign public IP address. I'm going to do that. Placement groups, we haven't covered off. We will cover that off later, but essentially it's for high-performance computing. Capacity reservations, so this is where you can reserve capacity on your EC2 instances in a specific availability zone. Not going to do that. IAM roles we'll cover off later. And in here, we've got our shutdown behavior. So what happens if we shut down this instance? Do we want to stop it or terminate it? Here we've got enable termination protection. This is to stop us from accidentally deleting our EC2 instances. I am going to enable it for this one. Here we've got monitoring. So this is enable CloudWatch. We are going to cover off CloudWatch in this section of the course. CloudWatch by default will monitor your EC2 instances every 5 minutes. If you want it to be less than that, if you want it to be every 1 minute interval, you need to enable detailed monitoring. But if you do that, you won't be within free tier. Tenancy in here, we can say, hey, I want shared hardware. I want a dedicated instance or a dedicated host. I'm just going to use a shared hardware. Elastic interface, we won't cover off yet. And down here, we've got advanced details. And this is where we can pass bootstrap scripts. And we're going to look at that later on in this section of the course. So basically, all you need to do is go ahead and click on the protect against termination, accidental termination. And you can go ahead and leave everything else as default. Next, let's go in and add our storage. Now we are going to cover off the different EBS volume types later on in this section of the course, but for now we've got three. We've got general purpose, we've got provisioned IOPS, these are both SSD, and then we have magnetic, which is standard. And if we click over here and go to add new volume, we actually get more options, and that's because this is the root device volume. And the root device volume can only launch on SSD or magnetic standard, but you can have additional volumes, and additional volumes include things like cold hard disk drive and throughput optimized hard disk drive, and these are all magnetic as well. Like I said, let's not get too bogged down in this right now. We're going to go and learn about that later on in this section of the course. I'm going to delete this off, so we're just going to launch with the root device volume. When we say root device volume or EBS, all we're talking about is a virtual disk in the cloud. This is where our operating system is going to be installed. So let's go ahead and add our tags. I am going to add some tags here. So I'm going to call this name, I'm going to call it web server 01. The department, so this is the department that owns that web server. I'm just going to call it developers, and add another tag. So we might have employee ID. This would be our employee ID who provisioned it, etc., etc. So this is a way of keeping track of our EC2 and our AWS infrastructure. Let's go ahead and configure our security group. Now, a security group is just a virtual firewall. That's all it is. It's a virtual firewall which allows communication over particular ports. We're going to cover security groups in a lot of detail in the VPC section of the course, but for now, just understand that it's a virtual firewall. This is how you enable traffic on the various different ports. So HTTP goes across port 80, SSH goes across port 22. So you're just allowing various different types of communication to your EC2 instance through your security group. We are going to create a new security group. I'm just going to call mine web DMZ, so demilitarized zone. So this is the security group that all my web servers are going to go into. And I'm going to add a rule. I'm going to allow port 80, so HTTP, and we're going to do it to 0.0.0.0/O. And so this is a CIDR address range. Again, we're going to cover this off in the networking section of the course, but essentially when these are all zeros, you're opening it up to the whole world. Now you might want to lock your SSH down to your particular IP. You can just click in there and then it will lock it down to this IP address. So you can only SSH in on this IP address. The problem with that is that if your IP address changes, then you won't be able to access this EC2 instance. So I'm just going to do 0.0.0.0/O. So I'm going to copy and paste it in there, and it'll give us a little warning. So let's go ahead and hit review and launch. And we're going to go ahead and hit launch. Now we do need to create a key pair because we've never done this before. So the way I like to think of public key and private keys, this is asymmetric encryption. So it means you need two. So asymmetric. With symmetric encryption, it's just one. So with asymmetric encryption, you've got a public key, and I want you to imagine that as a padlock. And you can go and take your public key and you can go and put it everywhere. You can put it on your bike, you can put it on your front door, you can put it on your neighbor's front door. It doesn't matter if someone gets your public key. Your private key is the key that opens that padlock, and you do not want anyone else to get your private key because then they can open up all your padlocks. You can open up all your public keys. So your public key will go on your EC2 instance. The private key you will save locally on your machine, and you will use that private key to be able to SSH into your EC2 instance. So let's go ahead and create a new key pair. I'm just going to call it my NV, or my US East 1 key pair. There we go. So my use 1 KP. I'm going to go ahead and download that. So download that to a safe location. You will need it to connect to your EC2 instance. So I've gone ahead and hit launch instance. And I'm going to go in and view my instances. So we can see now that it's launching. This is my instance ID. We can see it's inherited the name from my tag. We can see the instance type is a T2 micro. It's available in US East 1D. It's currently pending and the status checks are initializing. It's already got a DNS address. So this is a web address that we can use to go and visit our EC2 instance. And down here we can see you can move this so that it's bigger or smaller just by clicking these. And we can see all our information in here. So we can see our public IP address, for example. We can see that it's in our VPC, we can see what subnet it's in, etc., etc., etc. And this will become more and more familiar to you as you go on throughout the course and get your hands dirty with EC2. Now, I would copy this public IP address to your clipboard. Just click on this little icon. And now what we're going to do is we're going to SSH into our EC2 instance. So there's actually a few different ways that we can connect into our EC2 instances. We can use Terminal for Mac. We can use a plugin for Chrome if you're using Windows, for example. But the easiest way, which is uniform across both, is just by clicking Connect up here and using EC2 Instance Connect. And you can go ahead and just hit Connect. Your username is always going to be EC2-user, and go ahead and hit Connect. That will open up a new tab, and it will basically establish a session directly with your EC2 instance. So we can see in here, I'm already connected to it. I can do things like sudo su to elevate my privileges to root, and then I can go ahead and run yum updates, etc., etc. I am going to show you how to do this using Terminal, using for Mac users, as well as a plugin for Chrome, but just do whatever it is that you find best works for you. Throughout the rest of this course, I'm going to be using Terminal in my Mac. The reason is I've been using it for 10 years. I'm very used to it, and it's also a lot easier for you guys to see the screen because I can adjust the text, make it larger, change the fonts, etc. But the easiest way probably for you guys is just to go ahead and hit Connect and then use EC2 Instance Connect. So Mac users, I'll quickly show you how to use Terminal to connect to your EC2 instance. Windows users, if you want to jump ahead to about 13 minutes and 30 seconds, I'll show you how to install a plugin for Google Chrome. Okay, so if we click on Applications and we scroll all the way down, you'll be able to see Utilities, and in here we've got Terminal. So go ahead and open that up. By default, you'll be in your Downloads directory, and if you type in ls for list, you'll be able to see the files and folders in there. Now, I can see my key pair here. It's called my US East 1 key pair. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a directory called SSH, and I'm going to move my US East 1 to my SSH directory. And then I'm going to go into my SSH directory, so cd SSH, and then I can see it in here. Now what I'm going to do is going to change the permissions. I'm going to type chmod and then 400 and then my US East 1 key pair, and you can hit tab, by the way, that's how it will autofill. And that has just changed the permissions to lock my key down. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clear the screen, and we're going to type SSH and then EC2-user and then @ and then we need to paste our IP address in there, and then we need to do -i, and then it was called my US East 1 key pair. So basically we're connecting in as EC2 user at this address using this key pair. And it'll ask if you want to continue connecting, hit yes, and you should be able to connect in. Now, if you are having trouble, some networks block port 22. So you need to go and do this at home under home network, or do it on your, on your phone or something like that. Because some networks, like in public libraries, for example, or at schools, or even in your office, they might be blocking port 22. So this is a common frustrating thing that some people get when they can't connect to their EC2 instance. If it's not working, it's probably because your network's blocking the port 22. You will be able to do this at home though. So I have connected in, and what I'm going to do is just elevate my privileges to root. So we do that by typing sudo su, and this will change my user. You can see here it's gone from EC2 user to root. And this basically gives me super user access. This gives me administrator access across the entire EC2 instance. But you shouldn't really do this. I know a lot of Linux admins will be looking at this saying, oh, why don't you just type sudo for everything? But for the rest of this course, I am going to do it just because it makes the commands easier, and it makes it easier for beginners to follow along. So again, I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen. Okay, so for Windows users, what you need to do is go ahead and install Google Chrome as your browser. And then we're going to add an extension in Chrome, which will basically turn our browser into an SSH client. So what I want you to do is, once you've installed Chrome, go over to Google and just type in SSH Chrome extension into Google and go ahead and hit enter. And in here, you'll be able to see it's called the Secure Shell app, and I'll put this link in the resources section of the course. So go ahead and click on that. And then all we want to do is go ahead and download this extension. So I'm going to go ahead and hit add to Chrome. That will then add this to Chrome. Go ahead and hit add app, and that will go ahead and install this extension into Chrome. Can take a little bit of while, so just wait for it to finish installing. And there we go, it has now installed. Now to get to this extension, you just need to navigate to Chrome, // and then apps. That's how you are able to access your apps in Chrome. And then we have it here, it's the Secure Shell app. So go ahead and click on that. And then what we want to do is we want to go in and configure this in order to connect to our EC2 instance. So the first thing we need to do is go ahead and grab the IP address. So here's another EC2 instance I've just spun up. And I'm going to go ahead and click back in here. And so my username is just going to be EC2-user. So type that in, EC2-user. And then the host name in here, we'll just paste in our IP address. And then what we need to do is go and create our identity. Now, in order to do that, we need to navigate to where we installed or where we downloaded our PEM file. So now we need to navigate over to the command prompt. So just click, right-click on the Windows button, go ahead and hit Run, and then just type CMD, command. That will fire up the command prompt. You need to navigate to where you installed or where you downloaded your PEM file. Mine's installed on the downloads directory. So I'm just going to go to my downloads directory. So CD downloads. Then I'm just going to type dir, and that will list everything in my directory. And you can see here we've got my key pair. So this one's called mykp.pem. I'll just make this a bit bigger so you can see it. And then all we want to do is we want to type the following command. So we want to type in SSH -keygen, and then -y, and then -f. And then we're going to type the name of our key pair. So it's mykp.pem. And then we're going to output that to mykp and then .pub. So we're basically generating our public key. So this is asymmetric encryption, which means you always have a private key and a public key. A public key is basically like a padlock. You can give anyone a copy of that public key, but they cannot open it up without the private key. And that's why you'd never hand out your private key to anyone, because then they can open up your public key. That's the way I always like to think of it. So if we type in dir now, we can see our two files. We've got mykp.pem, which is our private key, and mykp.pub, which is our public key. The last thing we need to do is just rename the mykp.pem to just mykp. So you can give it any name that you want, but you've got to lose the .pem extension. Once we've done that, let's go back over to our Google Chrome extension. So it's in here. And then we're going to go ahead and hit import. And then what you want to do is just navigate to your downloads directory and import those two files. Now, again, you must have changed that extension from .pem to just being called, basically having no extension. So go ahead and hit open. That will then change your identity to that key pair. And then you should be able to just click in here. I've lost my username and password again, but I can just regenerate it. And then we should be able to go ahead and connect. So if we just hit enter, it'll now say it's loading the plugin, it's connecting to that IP address. Just type in yes, and then it's going to add it to the list of known hosts. And there we go. We have logged in to our EC2 instance. We can elevate our privileges, and then we can go ahead and clear the screen. And now you can follow along with all the commands in Windows as well. And then what we're going to do is we're going to apply some operating system updates. So if we just type in yum update -yes, so yum update -y will just look for operating system updates. You can see here that I do not need any updates. There's no security updates. So this is using the latest packages. And then what I want to do is I want to install Apache. So we type yum install httpd -yes. And that will go through and install Apache. And Apache basically turns our EC2 instance into a web server. Once you've done that, you can be able to go to your cd var www HTML directory. And anything that you put in here will be basically a website or will be accessible over port 80. So let's clear the screen. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a little file. We're going to call it nano and then index.html. Nano is just a text editor. And I'm just going to write some really quick HTML. So it'll be HTML header, not even going to bother with body and all of that. I'm just going to say hello cloud gurus. And we're going to end our header. And we're going to end our HTML. And then hit Control X and then hit yes and then hit enter. And you'll be able to see that file in there. So as soon as we turn on the Apache service or the HTTPD service, this web server will become basically a web server, and anyone will be able to go to our index.html. So to turn it on, all we need to do is type service, HTTPD, and then start. and that will start the HTTPD service. And then you might just want to type a command called check config on. Check config on will just basically start the HTTPD service if your EC2 instance accidentally reboots. You don't need to go in and manually go in and turn it on at the next reboot. So let's go ahead and test this by going over to a web browser. Okay, so here I am in a web browser, and all I'm going to do is paste in my IP address, hit enter, and you can see it. Hello, Cloud Gurus. So we've created our very first little web server. So I'm going to end this lecture here. You've done really, really well. If you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture, and we'll have a look at what else we can do with our EC2 instance before we go in and terminate it. So if you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture. Thank you.